Superheroes have always been near and dear to the hearts of children. And let's be honest, many adults as well. There's just something alluring about the whole alter ego donning a cape to save the world thing that speaks directly to millions of us. Across the world, fans have spent countless hours poring over splash pages, tying blankets around their necks like capes, and of course arguing about which superheroes were the best. When it comes to the two big players in the superhero game, Marvel and DC Comics, there has always been a clear line drawn in the sand regarding which heroes fans aligned with. And with the rise of the superhero movie craze, that age-old debate had spread even farther. But before they competed for box office domination, comic publishers were clashing to see who could take over the internet. A number of years after City of Heroes, likely the most popular superhero MMORPG ever, DC Comics went on to launch DC Universe, an MMORPG taking place in their own comic landscape. And a few years after that, Marvel Comics decided they would launch their very own superhero-themed massive multiplayer online action role-playing game, or a MMORPG, the subject of this episode. Despite years of development and one of the richest pantheons of heroes since ancient Rome, Marvel was never able to deliver the experience that so many fans were clamoring for. How exactly did such a seemingly surefire enterprise ultimately fail? Join me on the journey to uncovering the mysteries behind it all, and if you can't follow the clues, pay attention towards the end of the video where I will recap everything in my journal. And stay tuned to the very end of the video for a clue concerning the next step of the game. So without further ado, this is the story of Marvel Heroes, or as it was originally known as, Marvel Universe Online, and an investigation into why it failed as a title. Oh, and detectives, we're putting on our capes today. Before we can talk about Marvel's attempt at an MMORPG or MMOARPG, we need to go back to the granddaddy of all superhero MMOs, City of Heroes. After essentially creating the superhero MMO market, the success of City of Heroes helped spawn a number of similar titles. Most famous amongst its children are Champions Online, DC Universe Online, and then the topic of this particular episode, Marvel Universe Online, or as it was later known by when it fully launched as a game, Marvel Heroes. Well, and technically a few more names along the way. Marvel Heroes certainly had some auspicious beginnings, as before that game was even in development, Marvel themselves decided to sue City of Heroes when they believed their copyright was being infringed on. The lawsuit was dropped eventually and settled, though what happened next truly perplexed most people. Marvel contracted Cryptic Studios, the creators of City of Heroes, the same company they just finished suing, to develop and run their new project, a Marvel MMO, Marvel Universe Online. Marvel also tapped Microsoft Game Studios to publish and help oversee the production of the title. The vision behind the alliance of Microsoft Game Studios, Cryptic Studios, and Marvel is to expand the MMO genre and create an epic gaming experience exclusively for Xbox 360 and Windows Vista gamers to experience together online, said Shane Kim, corporate vice president of Microsoft Game Studios. In just 2 years, Cryptic Studios would prove to Marvel they weren't really ready or able to deliver on the kind of MMO experience that Marvel was expecting. As the article on screen stated at the time, according to Kim, the Marvel Universe Online was cancelled to commercial considerations and a general feeling that Microsoft and MMO developer Cryptic simply couldn't compete in the subscription-based MMO market. So the cancellation was in part due to the competition and expectations, but ultimately, VP Shane Kim and Microsoft didn't really trust in Cryptic Studios to perform, and for fairly good reasons. Cryptic Studios was working on their Star Trek MMO, basically the same exact time they started to work on Marvel Universe Online. Cryptic Studios seemed to have intentions of creating a stable of MMORPGs, whereas Microsoft and Marvel understandably wanted the focus to be first and foremost on the Marvel IP and a Marvel MMO. But of course, the story of Marvel Universe Online doesn't really end there, although it was confirmed to be officially cancelled as a project. News hit the web in 2009 that a new startup company, Gazillion Entertainment, run by none other than David Brevik, a lead dev on both Diablo 1 and 2, as well as a previous dev on Hellgate, which we covered on the channel as well. He had secured a 10-year licensing deal with Marvel Entertainment to develop multiple games based on the Marvel IP. This was unheard of for such a small company, especially for a startup, but when a name like David Brevik is behind something, that usually gets investors excited. Gazillion Entertainment wouldn't immediately make Marvel Heroes, instead choosing to begin with a title called Marvel Superhero Squad Online, which was more geared towards children, sort of in the same vein as Free Realms or Toontown. Gazillion would go on to tease a new Marvel project reported to be using the Unreal Engine 3 dubbed Marvel Heroes and set to be a MMO ARPG free-to-play title. The reveal trailer was showcased in May of 2012 and was dubbed by the media as a Diablo-style MMO. Isometric ARPG-style combat is clearly shown in the reveal trailer, and certainly the Diablo comparisons are relevant because, well, Gazillion's president and later CEO, David Brevik, had his Diablo-ingrained hands all over the project, also serving as a creative director. This made it seem more like an ARPG title, rather than aligning with the traditional definition of massive multiplayer online. In fact, David Brevik himself argued it didn't need to be the same as its competition to be an MMO. I don't think of an MMO as EverQuest Dark Age of Camelot, WoW clone. Everybody has gone down that route. We just didn't want to do the same thing that everyone seems to be doing. MMOs are more than just that. It's not 4 hours killing wolves, it's very, very different from that. And to give it all away for free is very exciting. So Marvel Heroes was an always online ARPG with MMO elements, sort of like an MMO light ARPG. Even just saying that out loud makes me think, good at one thing, mediocre at two things. Wait, let me write that down. Marvel Heroes would also feature a story by iconic comic writer Brian Michael Bendis. Brian had written for the likes of Daredevil, Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate X-Men, and the Avengers. Marvel wasn't messing around with their writing firepower here, and I'm sure they hoped that would translate to strong storytelling in their game, especially since it would be an ARPG title, which needs some sort of story to kind of tie it all in. And it's the Marvel IP. Gazillion would unveil the Marvel Heroes beta in September of 2012, and well, first impressions weren't so generous. To quote Engadget.com, Marvel Heroes isn't a heroic marvel. With only 11 characters playable at beta, it was very common to see the same few Marvel Heroes repeated over and over. Engadget writer Elliot Lefebvre said of Marvel Heroes, "It's not about story here, although that's an issue. It's about the fact that gameplay is not notably different from other countless games. There's nothing to make the game feel anything more like a superhero game. You level up, you collect loot dropped by enemies, you keep killing those things along several corridors, and hope that the next guy drops something even better." This kind of leads credence to the theory that perhaps David Brevik and Gazillion heavily leaned into the idea of a Diablo-style game and essentially came away with, well, Diablo with a Marvel paint job. Perhaps David kind of stuck to his guns on what he knew the best, or the team or whatever else figured that was the best way moving forward. But it's too early to tell for sure, as these were merely early beta impressions, and the game still had time to grow. Critics in near unison decried the fact that the gameplay loop in Marvel Heroes was incredibly repetitive and thus by nature, boring. But as 2013 began, Gazillion didn't really have the luxury of not trying to monetize because their entire future at this point hinged on this one project. They might have had the licensing to make Marvel games, but if they didn't make those games up to the Marvel standards, and Marvel decided to cut ties, it would effectively kill Gazillion overnight. And I'm sure you know the old saying about many eggs in just one basket. Gazillion Entertainment sold founder packages in early 2013, promising earlier access to content for those who purchased the higher tiers, such as the Ultimate Pack, valued at a whopping $200. A company with very little in the way of revenue needs to monetize in order to stay alive, especially a startup one that's pre-revenue. That is, unless they sought outside funding, which was likely already happening at this point of the development. Marvel Heroes' wide launch was slated for June 4th, 2013, and despite a slight few delays, their early access launch did indeed happen about a week before that, on May 29th. Unfortunately, fans and critics alike weren't really impressed with the title. Both echoed the previous beta impressions, although Marvel Heroes would at launch boast a 21 roster/class selection. These were all recognizable superheroes, with no way to change the way you look other than acquiring a skin, which might be made through crafting, possibly looted, or most importantly, purchased, to change a player's appearance. This means that theoretically you could have the same couple of characters in your given party, and no way to really change the look, unless possibly spending money or devoting more time towards playing the game. But it's kind of difficult to imagine what a better customization solution would be, because although there is customization in Marvel Heroes, you can change your gear, it doesn't change your appearance, only skins do. But could you imagine if they actually allowed people to, I don't know, change their character, or create maybe even spin-off characters of like Iron Man, or the spin-off Spider-Man character? It's almost like as if this has happened before in the past, maybe before people tried to make kind of spin-off characters and... Oh, yeah, that's right. It has happened before. Despite some obvious improvements in a bigger character roster, the game was still looking like it just simply wasn't worth the time or money, because although the game was free, in some cases new heroes or costumes would cost as much as $20 each. Not to mention, most combat was trivial in difficulty, which made it feel like busy work meant to slow you down until you found the next exit, only to rinse and repeat with a boss or two sprinkled in, and then rinse and repeat on different characters, because although the game entices you and wants you to change to other characters, it starts you back at level 1 with those characters, so you essentially have to do the same content over and over again if you want to level up other characters, and since the content isn't really that enjoyable in the first place, well, you see the problem. Above all other criticisms was the echoing sentiment that Marvel Heroes was both a poor ARPG and a poor MMO, and that ultimately, it still just seemed like a Diablo clone with a Marvel skin, and one that cost way more than $20. For a title that cost $80 million and spent 4 years in development, Marvel Heroes wasn't really living up to the hype or expectations. The overall dissatisfaction with the iteration of the game culminated in an announcement in May of 2014 that Gazillion was interested in relaunching Marvel Heroes, this time dubbed Marvel Heroes 2015. Relaunches were apparently planned to occur every year, as the article on screen explains. Yes, this is an annual thing we're going to do each year, along with planning a year ahead with the Marvel editorial team to tie in with story content. You'll see some nice surprise things in a few months. The new relaunch would boast new features, more characters, new game modes, and even in-game raiding. It also seemed to indicate a possible clean slate given its new, refreshed expectations and, well, another Metacritic page. Marvel Heroes 2015 would launch on June 4th, 2014, so it was already a year ahead of its time. I'm sorry. The new relaunch seemed to be far more successful based on initial impressions, managing to get at least 2 grade levels of improvement. But 2 grade levels from a failing grade only makes it a contender for the Most Improved award. It's still not quite the amazing experience many were expecting. Let's set the stage for a bit for why Marvel fans seem to be so educated and frankly critical about ARPGs. Back in 2006, Raven Software released Marvel Ultimate Alliance, which like Marvel Heroes was also an ARPG, and a damn good one at that. That game went on to become a cult classic, and its legacy continues to this day, with the 3rd installment set to launch on the Nintendo Switch sometime in 2019. It's understandable then that Marvel Ultimate Alliance would be the bar for any Marvel ARPG, including Marvel Heroes, or Marvel Heroes 2015 as it was now being called. Fans, myself included, didn't think Marvel Heroes had the same visceral combat and meaningful and challenging boss battles that Ultimate Alliance boasted nearly a decade earlier. When an audience has a clear example of what a specific game should be like, it's hard for them to get that expectation out of their mind. I think of WoW whenever I think of this. It's so hard of people thinking about other types of success or what it takes to be successful when you have this titan of the industry kind of looming over everybody. In this particular case, in my opinion, it's so easy to see which game, when you compare Ultimate Alliance and Marvel Heroes, has the more Marvel, or dare I say iconic look and feel to it. But feel free to make that judgment yourself. As for the MMO part of the equation being less than stellar, let me try to explain why. A massive multiplayer online game is one that uses its inherent player connectivity to bring its genre, typically an RPG, and in this case an ARPG, to a broader audience. This is usually accomplished by allowing for many people to play in the same zones concurrently, adding social features, incentivizing crafting, and so on. If I had to describe Marvel Heroes in terms of its acronym, it would be lowercase MMO, and the ARPG part would probably be spelled incorrectly or scribbled all over the place, because the game essentially doesn't do the best job of being the ARPG, as we previously pointed out, and as I'm now about to explain, doesn't exactly do the best job of being an MMO either. As Destructoid said of Marvel Heroes, The MMO aspect feels so shoehorned in that it seems as if it was merely an afterthought. It's far more worrying to think that it had been planned all along. For the entire first half of the bizarrely short game, other players are rarely anything other than a nuisance. Since you share space with many other players choosing from the same pool of heroes to play as, it's not uncommon to see, say for example, 6 Hulks with 3 different skins all in the same area, and if you happen to be playing as Hulk 2, it doesn't feel very heroic to be an Incredible Hulk instead of the Incredible Hulk. This is where I agree with the writer from Destructoid that the MMO part of Marvel Heroes seems like it's kind of tacked on, perhaps just to appease Marvel and their desire for an online component. When the core gameplay loop consists of dozens of superhero clones racing to defeat the endless horde of just above annoyance NPCs until they find the next room to, well, do the exact same thing over again, you kind of have a problem. There just isn't enough social gaming features in Marvel Heroes to truly call it an MMO. Marvel Heroes, an MMO ARPG, was both a poor MMO, as I stated, and a poor ARPG, at least when compared to its peers, which, well, happens often. On the ARPG front, games like Diablo and Torchlight worked far better, and in the MMO space, Marvel Heroes just severely lacked the social lures that the genre juggernauts had. Marvel Heroes 2015 was an improvement, however, and loyal fans of both Marvel and ARPGs were willing to see past some of its flaws. However, David Brevik stepping down as CEO in January 2016 certainly didn't seem like a good start to the new year, especially considering Brevik was also serving as the lead creative director on the game. Brevik cited wanting to pursue other opportunities as his reason for stepping down. While plausible, this could be publicity jargon for not being able to take Marvel Heroes in the direction that he wanted, or even that he was forced out of his position. This, of course, was all speculation. Although the reason otherwise for Brevik leaving is kind of private, the gift of hindsight lets us know from Brevik himself that primarily the reason was that he was going to be forced to work with Dave Von Dorman, who actually, ironically enough, would be taking over as president and CEO following Brevik's departure. Why he didn't want to work with him in particular? That's something that we'll probably figure out later in the video. I did a little bit of digging, and by digging I mean I randomly found this on Crunchbase.com, a website that tracks funding rounds, company acquisitions, and a bunch of other financial things I can't even begin to explain. And I found out that up until 2016, Gazillion had not needed more funding. In fact, their initial funding round netted them $60 million, which seems to have almost entirely covered the game's development costs for the first few years. On April 1st, 2016, they received more funding to the tune of $11 million. This likely explains why 2016 was a quiet year for Marvel Heroes, update-wise, because, well, they were secretly working on an Xbox One and PS4 port dubbed Marvel Heroes Omega, which was supposed to be another relaunch of Marvel Heroes, one that would also include its own exclusive content. Marvel Heroes Omega would launch on June 30th, 2017. In an interview with VentureBeat, a chief executive at Gazillion stated of the console launch, "I said this is going to cost us money, but if we pull this off, it's going to be huge." It's clear Gazillion was trying to chase the console audience, but what worried existing fans of the game was that the new relaunch didn't really seem big enough to warrant renaming the game again. And not to mention, the obvious new focus on the console audience wasn't exactly exciting to the PC audience. Looking back now, it's hard not to see it as an opportunity to monetize a new market, especially for a company who was clearly not looking so hot in terms of their prospects going forward. Marvel Heroes Omega, like Marvel Heroes 2015, had a better reception than the original title, but in ways still seemed like it was not yet finished, or perhaps never was going to be finished. A great example of the unfinished nature of the game is its story cutscenes. The game kicked off with wonderful cinematics of the Doctor Doom plotline, but as you progressed through the game, it seemed like Gazillion just ran out of juice and couldn't afford to keep up the same level of production, and thus relied on a more comic book still style. This sort of issue is present throughout the game. Many elements seemed strong at the start, but revealed their limitations and incomplete nature the further into the game players got. Marvel Heroes might have been slowly improving its quality as an online title, but those improvements came with an increasing amount of monetization. How, you ask? Well, the game at this point contained 30 characters, all requiring to be leveled up individually, which basically means repeating the already repetitive content with each class to build them up. It's so monotonous it just makes you want to spend money and buy the characters outright, and maybe an XP boost to speed up their leveling. and that's how most free-to-play games work. They incentivize you to want to play more. They might not require money to start playing, but along your journey to play the game, they increasingly find ways to monetize you, often with exclusive items or quality of life benefits like quicker leveling and maybe instant ports. And since the game's cost is no longer capped by a monthly subscription fee or a one-time purchase such as a buy-to-play, the developer can use these incremental incentives to effectively create whales, players who spend lots of money in the cash shop. Lots of money. If you don't understand why companies like when they have whales, it's because a whale on its own, a single whale could possibly spend in the thousands of dollars. If you take into consideration normal sub fees are $15, well, you can do the math. Between the game's monetization issues, lackluster gameplay, and the fact that it frankly didn't feel like a Marvel title, Marvel Heroes, even after their console launch, was struggling. By this point, Gazillion had taken on an extra $30 million investment round, meaning that they had a lot of investors to satisfy, all of whom were expecting the return on their investment. At this point, Gazillion had run up their budget to around $90 million overall. By the end of summer of 2017, a couple months after the launch of Marvel Heroes Omega, the PC population of the game had dropped below 1,000 concurrent players. This player deficit continued to grow, especially after Gazillion launched a huge content update exclusively for the console version, which naturally enraged their original PC audience. Only improving the console version of the game came across to many as an alienation of their core fanbase at best, and a greedy attempt at short-term profit maximization at worst. Around this time, Gazillion apparently was also working on a new VR game rumored to be a Star Trek related game. Perhaps they were just looking to branch out, but starting a new project while still failing to deliver on the expectations of their current one meant that people's patience with the company was wearing thin. In October 2017, reports surfaced that Gazillion had delayed an update summary, and after 2 weeks, still hadn't published the aforementioned update summary. It was a small thing, just a summary for updates, but with fans already losing faith in the company, the silence was deafening. Allegations came out concerning Gazillion CEO David Van Dorman. A Reddit user named Doomsaw, who happened to be a former creative director at Gazillion Entertainment, had this to say about his former CEO. Definitely don't judge the company based on the CEO, Dave Dorman. That's his actual real name, which he had to change for reasons that a simple Google will illustrate. His reputation for inappropriate conduct, especially towards women, is something that the industry insiders are aware of. Talk behind closed doors, his conduct has been tolerated because he often controls the money flow, and he's a good talker. This is a problem at tech companies that needs to be addressed much more assertively. So Dorman was accused of multiple accounts of sexual harassment over the span of 10 years. When asked during a live stream about the Dorman allegations, neither David Brevik nor his wife wanted to point-blank address it, as Brevik was concerned with respecting privacy and also pointing out that essentially anything he said would seem like sour grapes. But neither him nor his wife seemed to disagree with the allegations, nor did they attempt to disprove any of them. A prominent Marvel Heroes player/forum goer, known by MeatAxe, went a step further in his investigation of these issues. As he explains, don't look for the board to help or the CEO to get ousted. I'm one of the ones who done some digging around, got to put my criminal justice degrees and high-speed internet to use somehow, and ask questions. You want some dirt? Here you go. Dorman repped one of the investment partners prior to getting appointed as CEO. Brevik left, in part because the board wanted him to work with Dorman, who we now know has a very questionable history with employees, among other things. Brevik refused, so he was shown the door or allowed to resign. Dorman, aka Von Dorman, aka D Chow, aliases so far per legal records, situation came to light via a blog from years ago. A search of some available public records gives some of the story credibility, like a CJ court record from '99, his divorce decree, and a paternity civil issue with another woman who may or may not have been the same writer of the blog. Want to know where your online purchases are going, players? A rough estimate shows he has legal obligations every month of nearly $4,000. Then you add in the Doomsaw comments, and to pause what MeatAxe was saying here, some of these names are actually removed, so we don't know who these names are, but he did mention a CMO, apparently, tech artist, and even a CS team member being allowed to rejoin the company even after several complaints of harassment. As he continues to explain himself, there are other CEO, as he mentions, apparently turned a blind eye to everything and done absolutely nothing, which only serves to feed the predatory culture embraced by these CEOs and others of his ilk. Like in other industries, as Doomsaw alluded to, people are afraid to talk because of being blackballed, and never being able to work again. If this little company had such an open secret about their personnel, think what some of the big ones could be hiding. Among their staff that we don't know about, the rank and file employees deserve better. Although this sounds very credible and surely is very eloquently put, we can't assume it to be 100% true without a more formal investigation. But still, it's quite revealing about the whole behind-the-scenes situation at Gazillion Entertainment. It sounds like such behavior from the CEO was being ignored, or at worst, tolerated. This wasn't a good look for Gazillion Entertainment, and their metaphorical social stock was dropping even more than it already had. 2 weeks later, news hit the web that Disney, who currently owns Marvel, would be ending their relationship with Gazillion Entertainment, and that Marvel Heroes would be effectively shut down at the end of 2017, as well as their other title, Marvel Superhero Squad Online. This is where the previous clue fits in, the whole too many eggs in one basket thing. Because Gazillion Entertainment had a long contract set with Marvel Entertainment, it meant that they were likely too low-staffed to diversify their interests and focus solely on Marvel. This isn't inherently a problem when it's working out. Many developers from 343 Industries to Stoic Studios have had successful careers working on only single games or series, but if the developer is in a situation where their only project is a licensed IP and the owner of the IP decides to pull the plug on the project, it's just curtains for the developer. And since that just happens to describe Gazillion perfectly, curtains it was, as reports of their closure hit right before Thanksgiving 2017. And worst of all employees were laid off with no paid time off or severance pay. Shortly after, on November 28, 2017, Marvel Heroes Omega was taken down, effectively killing the Marvel Heroes project across all platforms. But the story, strangely enough, doesn't end there. I stumbled upon an article by Cecilia De Anastasio on Kotaku detailing some prior employee experiences during those last months before Gazillion Entertainment shut down. Here's just some of what she had to say. Gazillion's future had been for a long time in question, according to the 4 former employees interviewed for this story, all of whom asked to stay anonymous in order to protect their careers. For years, Gazillion had struggled to preserve its licensing contract with Marvel, but the problem started to ramp up earlier this year. Marvel Heroes was popular on PC, but its player base had steadily bled out since the release in 2013. So for Gazillion, porting the game to PlayStation and Xbox became a major milestone. Gazillion had released one other game and was basically reliant upon Marvel Heroes as a solvent. This console port, which entered development in 2016, came out in June 2017, was supposed to be the studio's saving grace. But as we all now know, it wasn't. According to Gazillion executives, in common sense, the console release hadn't performed well enough to save the title from being shuttered. Additionally, former Gazillion employees stated that they only learned in October 2017 that Gazillion had lost the license to Marvel, effectively ending Marvel Heroes. But studio executives told everyone they were planning to negotiate with Disney, and that they would update everyone on the status. That of course never happened, and only a month later, Gazillion was shut down. I believe we've done enough investigating here to call it a wrap, and definitively answer the question of how Marvel Heroes met its ultimate demise. So it's that time in the video where I pull out my journal and make sure you guys were keeping up. Sort of like sleeping Kogoro right before he does his big reveal, or should I say Conan does his big reveal. So why did Marvel Heroes / Gazillion Entertainment fail? Gazillion Entertainment, a startup development company, was almost exclusively focused on Marvel Heroes, but only having one client means that your business can fold overnight if things go south. After David Brevik left the company and David Dorman took over, the company pushed a console release and primarily focused on that market instead of its original PC audience. This effectively killed the initial player base. Plus, Dorman had a reputation of an all-around creep and had many sexual allegations brought against him. Not the best reputation or person to be running your company. Marvel Heroes was so Diablo-like that the only thing that really set it apart was the license. And well, the fact that it actually was an inferior Diablo in just about every way, as well as an inferior MMO, with the MMO aspect sometimes seeming just tacked on. The game, well, wasn't ever that great. It would be a stretch to even call it good. Its lukewarm reception every time it launched sort of proves that theory. I think it's safe to say, case closed. Having a prominent and popular license doesn't excuse making a poor game, because you shouldn't expect success solely based on name recognition. But you can't really blame the developers entirely. It seemed that they were possibly dealt a bad hand in many ways. Perhaps having really big expectations from Marvel could be possibly scary. Who knows? Whatever the case is, it's important not to always pile blame on a single company or a single reason, and instead consider other perspectives when investigating. There's always one side's story, the other side's story, and then the actual truth. But the reason for a death of a game, or the reason for a death of a company, or really the death of anything, is never really entirely just one particular thing, so it's helpful to see it more holistically. It's important to remember that companies are run by people, and sometimes people make bad decisions. But it doesn't mean that every member of the company made bad decisions, many are just doing their job. It's not malicious, and although I don't think Marvel Heroes was particularly a good game, I appreciate the time and effort that the developers who are passionate about it put into it. Too often, passionate developers get inadvertently sabotaged by poor leadership, or have investors right over their shoulders impacting all of their creative decisions. It's a delicate balance. You need the business side to keep the company running, but you also need to give creators room to do their jobs as well. And when the business side stifles the creative side, or doesn't trust them to create, it becomes a pressure cooker. Sure, sometimes it makes diamonds, but usually it just burns out a whole lot of people out of the industry and makes a poor game. Thanks for watching, guys.
If you want to clean up, you got to play dirty.